Okay, anybody have any unresolved questions about the course or their project? If you do, please get in touch with me by email or sign up to meet with me. There's like 3 weeks left. So if you've saved up your questions, this is the time to let me know. Okay, so we got the standard set of forms here. I want to talk a little bit about the midterm markups that I did. You shouldn't be too distressed at all the red on your paper. That's sort of typical. So I make comments, suggestions, and some are corrections, and some are just grammar. So some of the stuff is just my personal way of dealing with language that I would like to see you guys work on. And it's really important to have a good writing style, to have good syntax, grammar, spell correctly, and a good layout of your report, because you're communicating, how your value to me or to your future employer when you write a good report. So it's really important. And the report should be in a professional engineering style. Some people sort of went astray on that. Some people went into too much detail. I'm really looking for something that's concise. One of the other things is embedding the figures within the text. It makes it a whole lot more readable. So please do that next time. Okay. So, if you do a really good report, you can show it to a potential employer, and he'll be all impressed by your project and your report. So this is not just for me, but it could get you a job. Okay, so we have 3 weeks left, and I want to just go through the remaining class sessions. The last class session is Thursday the 15th. We'll meet in the classroom, and then we'll fill out an evaluation form, and then everybody bring their projects, and we're going to set up outside. Hopefully the weather will be nice, and we'll have like a trade show format where you show off your projects to one another and other people from the community. So it ought to be a lot of fun, and I'll buy some burritos and stuff, so it'll be a real celebration. 2 weeks from today, March 13th, is your end of term presentations, just like the midterms. Same timing, same format. The lineup is inverted from the midterms. So if you were last before, you're first now. So, and again, seven minutes. And the same kind of setup where you put stuff on Google Drive, send me the URL, and hopefully that'll work out as good as it did a couple weeks ago. On the 8th, we'll have our last guest lecturer. This will be Ralph Hotchkiss. He's going to be talking about wheelchair fabrication in developing countries. He's done this before, and it is a really interesting talk about his travels throughout the world and how he gets wheelchairs designed for fabrication in the country at very low cost, but it turns out to be a very rugged wheelchair, so he'll tell that story. On Tuesday, next Tuesday, we're going to have a film screening, not in here, but in the Peterson building in the atrium there. I found a place where I can buy a giant bag of popcorn. So we're going to set up in the atrium and show the film screening of Four Wheel Bob, and the filmmaker and Bob will be there. So it should be really interesting. And on Thursday, I know it's supposed to rain, but we're going to try to get our assistive technology fair going. If it's not raining too hard, we can set up in this breezeway that's sheltered just outside the classroom. If it's raining too hard, or it's too cold, or too breezy, we'll locate that in here. So it'll be there's 9 vendors. Each will bring a product or describe a service that they do locally for people with disabilities or older adults. You'll have a chance to walk around and talk to all these people and ask them about their products or service. So that's going to be fun too. But today we have a lecture on bionic ears in just a few minutes. But I want to also talk about what you should be doing with your project. This is really sort of crunch time. You have a couple weeks to go. So make sure you finish this process. If you have to buy any parts, please do that now. Make sure you get everything so you can have something good to show in 2 weeks. Something good to talk about in 2 weeks and something good to show in 2 weeks and 2 days. So, yep. Film screening. So here we are over here in the Peterson building is just over here, so not very far. So here's big news. I know you guys are working hard on your projects, and you can request to be excused from the film screening as a team. Just send me an email. Okay, I hate to do this because I know the film is so good, but I also know that you guys are working hard and maybe need a little extra time. So if you do, please let me know. Okay, I don't have four-wheel Bob to hand out in case you wanted to see it, after the quarter, but I do have another equally good film called Fixed, and it was just on campus a few weeks ago as well. So you're welcome to borrow the DVD overnight after the quarter's over and view that, okay? Again, Thursday Assistive Technology Fair will start about the same time. We'll see how the weather goes to see how much of it will be outside and see how much of it will be in here. Okay. We're going to take a break and then hear from Dr. Lindsay Felt on her topic will be bionic ears, cochlear implants, and the future of technology. But first, I want to do a little talk on vintage assistive technology. So these are things that are old. So this is an Apple II ad from so long ago. This was actually the clothes that people wore when Apple II was in fashion, okay? How many had an Apple II or remember Apple II? Oh, God. Okay. Here's some old wheelchair designs. This wheelchair is a wooden wheelchair, wooden wheels, wooden rims, wooden seat, and this is wicker here, has a nice leg support. But the wheels are so far forward that, probably you can only just shuffle forward.
It's better turning indoors.
Ah, okay. Yeah, because it's way in front of the center of gravity. So here's the same wheelchairs at the White House, 1924, meeting the president back then. Of course, everybody had an assistant and was being pushed. So here's some really old wheelchairs. This one looks like it was like a rocking chair, and had been had the rocker cut off and these wheels and axle put in. This looks like from an old, wagon wheel or something. And here's this wheelchair that we saw in the previous slides, one rear wheel, and instead of a nice wicker seat and back, these are just made out of wood. Okay. Moving forward to the 1980s, this is a chair that was made locally by this company Quest. They were sponsored by Foster's Beer from Australia. This was a really neat chair. It did stair climbing. It had actually a tank tread underneath here that engaged the chairs. And when you were out on a flat surface, those treads would retract and there'd be just regular wheels underneath. Another interesting thing about this is that when you're going up the stairs, this would adjust the seat to be vertical so that you're not leaning forward when you're going up a stair. And of course, you're going up the stairs backwards. So this never made it to market, but it was an interesting chair. Here's some other chairs that actually were worked on at the VA Medical Center. This is a prototype of an omnidirectional wheelchair with 3 wheels, all at different angles. And when you operated the joystick, if you pushed the joystick sideways, the chair would go sideways, which was really interesting. And here's a later prototype of it at a conference. And again, with the Omni wheels, in this case, there's 2 wheels in front and 1 wheel in the back. Of course, we needed a Recaro racing seat to make it look cool, right? Again, this almost made it to commercialization, but none of them were ever sold, unfortunately. Functional electric stimulation, they used this to stimulate muscles and to produce walking. And a lot of these research was done with embedded electrodes. So electrodes were actually went through the skin and activated muscles beneath the skin, which turned out not to be a good idea because the electrodes broke off in the leg and caused a lot of problems afterwards. This is Dr. Marcellet from the VA with another patient who demonstrated this. And I think I was actually in this room during this conference. Here's a very old arm prosthetic exoskeleton that's controlled by a chin control here. This is a switch that operated the arm. The arm is attached to a wheelchair, so you couldn't use the arm unless you were actually in the wheelchair. So sort of an old design. These are a couple of feeding aids that help you feed yourself independently. There's typically a switch that operates the thing, either going through the same kind of cycle, or there are some of them that, there's one that we did that had a robotic arm that you could command by voice to pick up food and also, put a tray of food in a microwave and take it out and actually turn the knob to heat it up. And these are still around, and people need these for if they don't have good control over their arms or they have tremors and stuff. Those would be reasons for using these kinds of devices. This is what's called environmental control units, and this is a way for somebody who can't get out of bed and is a quadriplegic to control elements in their environment, AC power, emergency call devices and alarms and stuff like that. And basically it was had a straw that you sipped or puffed into that caused switch closures, which operated this display. You would sequence through the functions, and when you got to the function that you want, you would blow into it and it would activate it and do such things as turn on the TV, change channels. There was actually a phone module with this as well. But the bad thing about this is that the control box here, everything that you wanted to control from AC had to be plugged in here. So if you had a lamp on the other side of the room, you had to have an extension cord that went all the way into it. So this was one of the first ones made. In the early 80s, a guy made this voice-controlled environmental control called Butler in the Box. And this was actually really good technology. You would say the command and it would turn on and off a device. And this used these X10 modules, which basically are wirelessly turn on and off devices in your house. Very, very clever technology, but I think maybe a little bit ahead of its time. Okay, eye gaze control for using communication aids for people who are non-vocal. 2 types, one on the glasses that went to a computer, I would guess. Another one where it sat on a desktop. The issue with these is that you had to be very still, because if you moved your head, it would take the whole thing out of whose phone is that? Oh, she's in the bathroom. Okay. Okay. So these early eye gaze control devices did not work very well, but you have to start someplace, okay? Another communication system, again, for people who are nonverbal, you would push around this pod that had this magnet on it, select letters by dwelling over them. It would illuminate your message here and print it out, and there were some of these that actually vocalized your message so you can communicate with other people. Speak and Spell was a commercial device that you would hit the letters and it would try to pronounce whatever word you tried to make. Okay. Artificial arm, very well crafted, 1500s to 1600s. Yeah. This is what a peg leg looks like. Actually made out of wood, but there's a little bit of a socket here and a belt around the stump. And this guy actually was a dancer, and he would perform, and being a peg leg person was one of his attractions. Okay, here's some old wooden legs, and you can imagine how heavy these were. So a lot of them had belts to hold them up, and straps and stuff like that, and these were all carved out of wood. Exoskeletons, this is an early exoskeleton. This is like basically a wearable master-slave robot, and you can use this giant hand to crack walnuts really easily. But you see it goes all the way down to the ground, so it can support a lot of weight. I'm not sure if this ever became practical or was ever used because it's just too big. But students can make exoskeletons too, and these are some students from Purdue who made these. But the bad thing is that you control your exoskeleton with your control in your other hand, in your good hand, so maybe not very practical. And then there was a group of students with the robotics club here who also made an arm exoskeleton. Okay, of course, the ultimate exoskeleton, is the one that Iron Man uses. Can't have one that's better than that. Here's a wheelchair that was designed to be steampunk design, and it had smoke coming out here, and it had bubbling water, and it had this piston that I think was pretty much non-functional, and these nice controls here, but it looked really cool, right? Okay, and the last one is this chopper that Orange County Choppers made, and it was on TV, where the user in a wheelchair would just get on it via a ramp in the back and be locked down, and he would have a motorcycle. So it's a lot of fun. Any questions about this stuff? Okay, so we'll take about a 5-minute break. If you haven't signed in or picked up evaluation form or a form about the evaluation, please do that now, and we'll be back with our guest speaker. Yeah. Yeah, I can find that. Okay, this is for our camera.
Okay. Would it be possible to briefly shut the door for just
Sure.
a little bit?
Yeah.
Like,
Just this one or both of them?
just that one. Maybe I should do it so that the microphone's not buried inside the coat.
Okay, and this is forward and laser pointer.
Okay. And if I were to wanted to play a link, then
I do it.
you do it here. Okay, got it. So we just need to be done at 10 minutes to 6. Okay,
So
I can easily do that.
5 o'clock now.
Yeah,
So
I think I can manage that.
We'll start up.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks again for inviting me.
No, thank you.
Yeah, but it's fun. I don't get to talk about cochlear implants specifically all that often anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, except for to my students, maybe for the first 5 minutes of class.
I saw an article in the Daily
Oh, yeah.
about some people who were promoting the creation of a disabilities study.
Yeah, so I've been on that
Oh, okay.
committee and student-driven, and so Joanne Dorfman
Yeah,
taught
no,
the first one,
yeah,
yeah,
I know
and
him,
so
and-
they want to continue that.
And Bryce.
Bryce Tuttle, yeah, and
Yeah.
Zena.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't realize that they came to speak at your class
Yeah,
a
that
couple
was
weeks
great.
ago.
Yeah.
That must have been great.
Week 3.
Week 3?
Yeah.
That was
Yeah,
great,
it was very
yeah. So we'll see what happens.
Okay, let me get these folks back in.
Welcome. It's good to see you. I said it's good to see you. This might be a little redundant. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay, let's get going. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Lindsay Felt, who is a postdoctoral teaching fellow in the program in Writing and Rhetoric here at Stanford. She received her PhD in English from Stanford in 2016, holds a BA from Haverford College. Where is that?
That's right outside of Philadelphia.
Oh, Philadelphia, okay. Before coming to Stanford, she worked as a journalist for both ESPN, the magazine, and ESPN.com. Her current research interests include contemporary American literature, media culture, science fiction, science and technology studies, and disability studies. She's currently researching how disabled bodies crucially shape concepts of electronic communication in the post-World War II era, and has written articles on female hackers in the cyberpunk fiction and the little-known history of the first cybernetic limb and its influence on communication engineering in the early Cold War era. She teaches a course called The New Normal, The Rhetoric of Disability, which explores how advances in science, technology, medicine, and culture have transformed our understanding of disability, normalcy, and health. So let's welcome Lindsay to our class.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Lindsay Felt. Thank you to David for that very warm welcome. I'm really excited to be here today. I just wanted to ask, can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, okay, cool. And if at any point you have a hard time hearing me, just let me know. So before I begin, I just wanted to invite all of you to please ask me questions or jump in with comments or remarks, because this presentation is meant to be interactive, and I especially wanted to invite all of you to ask questions about my own personal experiences with cochlear implants, of which I have 2. So I'll say a little bit more about my personal experiences, and then I'll give some background on cochlear implants. So please, at any point, feel free to raise your hand and jump in and ask a question, okay? So I'll begin by sharing that I am deaf, and I also wear bilateral cochlear implants. So that means that I wear cochlear implants on both sides, on my right side and on my left side. And so when David asked me to speak to you today, I decided that I wanted to talk about cochlear implants in the context of assistive technology, especially because I think it helps us also imagine the future of assistive technology. Though, interestingly enough, in my lifetime, I've actually used a whole range of assistive technologies, beginning with hearing aids, also using FM systems and other kinds of technologies like TTYs, which was sort of like a rudimentary computer that converted voice to text and vice versa. Those are pretty much archaic at this point, but some people still use them. So cochlear implants were developed about 45 years ago, give or take. And they were designed as a medical intervention for the deaf and hard of hearing. And this particular device works by surgeons operate a medical procedure in which they insert a tiny and very thin string of electrodes into the inner ear, specifically the inner ear, the organ called the cochlea, which is a snail-shaped organ, very small, so a very delicate procedure. And the purpose of this technology was to bypass one's natural hearing in order to give them a wider or perhaps fuller array of sound. So I'll say a little bit more about this. But in a way, and I was thinking about this yesterday when I was working on my notes, in a way, the cochlear implant actually kind of brings together all of these other modes of assistive technology, right? It comes packaged now with mobile technology software. So though I don't have these capabilities just yet with my current device, there are existing devices out there that allow users to toggle their volume and different noise parameters at the flick of their iPhone or other sorts of devices, which is pretty remarkable. When I first got the behind-the-ear device, it came with a remote control. I was like, what is this thing? A remote control for my hearing? I personally don't use that very often because I find it a little bit cumbersome to remember where it's located in my purse or my backpack. But so in a way, it comes with all these other host of accessories and devices to control this one particular powerful device. So that's something to keep in mind. But I wanted to begin by asking why, not why do I need this device, but why do I choose to use this device, which is a slightly different framing because it moves us away from the medical deficit model. Yeah, question.
Can I ask what age you got this, and
Yes.
whether you think age makes a difference in this?
Yep, I'm getting there. So great question. I got my first implant when I was 18. So roughly around the age of all of you guys. And you can probably do the math and try to figure out how old I am now. And then I actually got the second implant not too long ago. So that was in 2013. And interestingly enough, I got both implants here at Stanford. So I grew up in California, so I got my first implant at the Stanford Ear Institute at 18 by a terrific surgeon who's no longer there. And then the second one when I was a graduate student in the English department by a surgeon who is currently here, Dr. Nicholas Blevins, who was wonderful. So I'll just make this remark now, but part of my decision to get the second one was because I decided that I needed a fuller array of sound. I was sort of listening with just one ear, but it turns out that we're actually supposed to listen with 2 ears, not 1 ear. And so I felt that I needed a little bit more of a greater range of sound. I had plateaued a little bit with that first ear. And initially, some of the surgeons and my audiologists were a little bit hesitant for me to get the second one because it had been 10 years since I had done anything with that ear. I hadn't even stimulated it with a hearing aid. So surprisingly, I actually did really well with the second one. But anyway, small sort of side note, one thing that prompted me also to get that second implant was I found out that Stanford would cover the insurance in full. So completely covered, did not have to pay a dime, which was really, truly amazing because the insurance and the expenses for this kind of device can be really prohibitive for many, many people. And so in a way, you have to be somewhat privileged to get this device in the first place. You have to have insurance. So thanks for that question. So to go along with a little bit of that biographical background, so I became profoundly deaf when I was at the age of 4. The doctors weren't really sure exactly why or what triggered the hearing loss, but they diagnosed me with large vestibular aqueduct syndrome, which essentially means that my inner ear, there's many, many different intricate structures in the inner ear, but that one particular structure filled up with fluid and destroyed many of the hair cells that I had. And so it was immediate, and it actually happened twice. Once when I was 3 and the second time when I was 4. And they weren't really sure why, but one suspicion that they had was because I'm actually an identical twin. So it may have been that I was born, it was a birth defect, so to speak. And the symptoms essentially manifested themselves a little bit later on. You'll also be interested to know that my identical twin sister has perfect hearing, so, which has actually been quite beneficial to me because she's been an interpretive source throughout my life. And so our relationship is actually very close because she has always been an advocate for me. And when I got the cochlear implants, she realized that I didn't need her so much. So that kind of changed the dynamic of our relationship a little bit. Any other questions at this point? I'm happy to, yeah.
So were you learning using sign during that time?
Yeah, so I was actually mainstreamed, and so my parents decided that because I was born with hearing, that they would continue me along the mainstreamed oral path. So in the deaf community, there are a number of different paths one can take, but one path is the oral path. So you mainstream a child with hearing loss and you situate them in a classroom with hearing peers, and you maybe give them some additional support with speech therapy, which I received a lot of, and additional rehabilitation for listening and support. So I was actually mainstreamed all the way through my life. And so my parents, when they made that decision, they made it at the recommendation of many physicians and doctors and speech therapists who said, she already has a really great foundation for language. Your brain is remarkably receptive when you're that young. So they said, if she does well with this, we'll continue on. If not, then maybe we'll try sign language. So that choice, which I had no say in, actually really set me on a particular path. I have made efforts to learn sign language in the last several years, but because I don't actually have a very, very strong deaf community, it's hard for me to practice that language, but it's a beautiful language, and it's something that, is sort of on my bucket list that I would like to work on. Okay, so maybe we should probably jump a little bit into this lecture. So let's see. So I said a little bit about when and how I got my cochlear implant. My first one was in 2002, and my second one was in 2013. And I will say a little bit about the fact that once this procedure happens, it's not immediate. You're not immediately successful. You have to work at this procedure. You are receiving a completely different form of sound. And so your brain has to train itself to listen to these new sounds. It's essentially an entirely new auditory vocabulary. And so it can take months, if not years, to actually learn how to listen with a cochlear implant. And that's what happened with me. With the first implant, I would say it took me about 6 months to feel like I actually enjoyed or liked what I was hearing. This was after rigorous rehabilitation with an audiologist and someone who actually works specifically on rehabilitation therapy for people with cochlear implants. So I had to work really hard, and it was often very frustrating and discouraging. It was a little painful. The kind of sounds that you would hear at first were very abrasive. They sounded a little bit robotic, if you will. The first time I heard with the cochlear implant, it didn't really sound like anything. It felt like there was something swirling around in my head. It's very hard to put into words. But the second time I got my cochlear implant, I actually picked it up right away. And that was very surprising for the surgeons because I already had that core fundamental language and understanding. And so I think my brain just picked that up very surprisingly. I have a question back here. Yeah.
Talking about pardon you, the difference in technology advancements during that period of time between the two
Yeah.
implants?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to get to this in the lecture, but I'll say that it changed radically. It went from a box, a bulky box that I wore in my pocket or in my shirt that was connected to something that was behind the ear. So I was a soccer player at the time, and I was like, what am I supposed to do with this? How am I supposed to play with this giant box? But fortunately, right around that time, 6 months after, they first went to the first behind the ear, and they did away with the box. And so now it's been behind the ear for the past decade, and I'll show you, we'll get there, I promise, is one disc behind the ear, and that's it. With no one disc that's just on top of the skull. So tiny. So it's been limited by battery size. That's really been one of the challenges, and miniaturization. They're still and the software is incredibly complex. So I will come back to that and answer that in more fully, but that's a great question. Okay, so let's just jump in. Okay, we haven't even gotten to the first slide. So the introductions was meant to be somewhat extensive because I wanted to share a little bit about my story, and I'm happy to continue to elaborate on that. I did want to walk us through a brief history of cochlear implants just to show how much they've developed and how they were initially conceptualized. And then I want to talk a little bit about this idea of bionic rhetoric. So one thing that maybe you have all talked a little bit about in this class is the tension between normalization and enhancement. And I think that cochlear implants are really sort of poised on the cusp of that. They were initially conceived of as a product that would help normalize hearing, but I would argue now that we're moving into sort of a different area where perhaps people are starting to think of the ways that they might enhance our hearing and beyond, okay? So that sounds pretty provocative. And then we'll talk a little bit about ways in which other communities have talked about the cochlear implant as a contested technology, especially within the deaf community, for example. And then finally, we'll think about how cochlear implants help us think about the future of assistive technology. Okay, so how many of you have actually heard of what a cochlear implant is? Okay, so this may be redundant, but I think it's important to just break down the specifics of how it works a little bit. So before you even get a cochlear implant, you have to be evaluated for candidacy. So not just anyone can get a cochlear implant. You have to have a certain degree of hearing loss. And I'm not actually sure what that is at this moment in time, because over the years, that barrier has been lowered significantly. So when I first got my cochlear implant, you had to have a profound, severe hearing loss. But today, I think that's not quite the case. And also, another major difference is a trend in which you now have infants as young as 6 months old being implanted, which is pretty shocking. And also, those in the elderly population are now getting implanted, which were not initially part of the candidacy process, okay? So you have a much bigger population now that is being considered for candidacy. So before you even get a cochlear implant, you have to receive a surgery. You have to be eligible. And there's a very specific, particularized subset of people that can actually perform this surgery. And it works by essentially making an incision behind the ear, drilling a hole inside one's skull, and carving out a space for what you'll see up here for this processor to sit, okay? So it's a pretty invasive surgery. It's essentially, arguably, brain surgery. But it's since my first time for my second time, the surgery time has gone down radically and the recovery time has gone down radically. So in my first implant, it took me 1 month to recover. And what I mean by that is it took me 1 month before I could actually get activated. So my inner ear had to rest. The second time, it was only 2 weeks before I went into the audiologist's office. So they have become much more refined and precise in the procedure. So once the individual has time to rest and recover, they go into an audiologist's office and they sit you down and they hook you up. They give you your device and they hook you up to a computer that has a specific software program that allows them to program the program the ear with different parameters. And so what that looks like, I'm sorry I don't have a picture of that, but there's essentially 22 bars, and each bar represents a frequency on the electrode. And they take your maximum threshold, so what is the loudest possible sound that you're comfortable with, and the minimum threshold, what you can barely hear or barely discern. And they do that for each frequency. And it's a time-consuming process, and then once they go through each frequency, they turn them all on at once. And that can be a really overwhelming experience. Maybe some of you have seen on YouTube this whole genre of videos from first activated individuals who just start sobbing, and everyone around them starts sobbing. It's a very emotional experience. So that was a little bit like that for me, I'll admit. So it's a very overwhelming experience. It can be, especially for those who have never heard anything before in their lives. So you've got the external device here. There's a magnet that sits on top of the scalp. So I have a magnet that slots into place. And then you have this external processor here, which has like a microphone and picks up the external sounds. And this also holds all the software in the device and also the batteries. So battery power is one of the limiting factors of these implants. I have a rechargeable battery because I'm trying to be environmentally conscious. It lasts about 24 hours, so I have to charge it every night. If I wore a disposable battery, it would last for 4 days. That's gotten better over time, but that's still a limiting factor because the amount of power that this implant needs is remarkable. Okay. You also have the electrode array in the cochlea, which is down here. So that usually has about 24 electrodes, give or take. Not all electrodes are activated. In my experience, they've actually had to deactivate a few electrodes because sometimes the internal electrode can shift and you can get some facial twitching, which actually happened to me once, or they can just get a little bit wonky because it's very close to the facial nerves. So 24 electrodes that you have to work with. Okay. I will say, just to jump ahead, so the very first cochlear implant had 1 channel, so 1 electrode essentially. Try to imagine listening with just 1 channel, not very rich. Now they have 24, a little bit better, but by comparison, we all have thousands of hair cells, thousands of channels to hear with. So still pretty rudimentary, but getting better, okay? I think we're just looking at time. Okay, so I'm gonna be pretty brief with this, but this sort of goes back to your question, how have cochlear implants evolved over time? Pretty radically. And in a way, it's kind of a history of miniaturization, okay? So 1925 was the very first modern period of electrical hearing, and that's when that begins. You had a handful of radio enthusiasts who reported hearing sounds when they held electrodes to their ears. And this sort of confirmed the hypothesis that the inner ear behaved like a transmitter, okay? That it converted sound waves into electrical currents which were carried to the brain, okay? So that very first experiment was sort of where it began. And then you had 1972, which was another major turning point, and you have this patient Charles Grazer, who was hard of hearing, but also a radio enthusiast, who, let's see, what was he happened to be an ex-ham radio operator who actually played around with like his own hearing. So he was a great person to begin with, and he was kind of his own test subject. So he worked with Dr. William House, and he received the very first single channel take-home implant. It was somewhat successful, but it had many problems, okay? So then in 1982, this was where you have the very first modern implants going on the market. A man named Graham Clark, he was an Australian actually, he introduces the first multi-channel Nucleus 22 implant in 1984. So Nucleus is actually one of the major devices, and this company now is known as Cochlear. There's essentially two major competitors. There's Cochlear and Advanced Bionics. I wear Cochlear, but one has to sort of make decisions about which company they want to go with when they're deciding to get a cochlear implant. And then now you have, by 2004, you have 82,000 people worldwide are implanted with this device. And then in 2007, you start to see people getting bilateral cochlear implants. That was not common initially. So around that time, I think some of the insurance terms started to shift, and people actually started to realize that the brain can accommodate two different devices and that they can actually sort of speak to each other. There was a lot of concern that having bilateral devices would essentially just confuse the user. But in fact, bilateral implantation is now the norm, especially for those just getting an implant for the first time. They just go right to bilateral. Okay, now in 2012, you have over 300,000 people worldwide, okay? That number is way higher. So quite a significant population of people with cochlear implants. Okay, so I wanted to show you a demo, or rather have you listen to a demo of what it sounds like with a cochlear implant. So we're gonna play this, and I'm gonna ask you to just write down what you think. So there's two different parts of this. One is a song that's being played through different increasingly complex channels, and then the other one is a phrase that's said. So I want you to try to see if you can figure out what that phrase or that song is, provided that we can get this up. Do you want me to hook up my computer?
Fast forward to that page.
Okay, so this is speech. So listen carefully and see if you can figure out what's being said. It's going to become clear.
What kind of bait do you use to catch salmon? What kind of bait do you use to catch salmon? What kind of bait do you use to catch salmon?
What kind of bait do you use to catch salmon?
Any ideas? Shout it out if you think you know what this is. It should have been like Katy Perry.
This should be a game show.
I know, right? Do you know what it is? I don't actually. Okay. Did anyone actually recognize the final song? No. I was just thinking this would be way better if it was like a Katy Perry song or something, but this is a little bit dated. I actually cannot tell you what that song is, but you all should be able to. But what are some thoughts about this, or reactions to this demo, whether it was the speech or the music? Anything that jumped out to you? Did anyone actually figure out what was being said before normal speech? So was that like the 12 channel or the 18 channel?
Could you tell what it was over these speakers?
That's actually also a good point. So this is very meta. What would someone with a cochlear implant listening to a simulation of a cochlear implant be able to say? I think when I listened to it on my computer, I was able to get it like either the second to last one. But I would say, again, this is sort of, I'm already at this strange remove, that it's pretty accurate. I would say it captures the experience of what it's like when you first get the cochlear implant to what it sounds like for me now. So normal speech is what everything sounds like to me now, even though I am hearing speech through a set of electrodes.
Did you go through an odd period of hearing your own voice differently after each one? And
Great
getting
question.
a different sense of who you were because you sounded different?
Great question, yes. To put it simply, when I first heard myself with the first implant, I was pretty horrified. I thought my voice sounded awful, and I became really self-conscious about speaking for a short period of time. I fortunately was able to get over that. But yeah, it was really challenging. It was a somewhat out-of-body experience. It was a question of, so wait, this is really what I sound like, but that's not really what I sound like because I'm just learning how to hear through this device. So now I think I have some understanding of what I sound like, but I think our own perception of what we sound like is inherently going to be different from anyone else's.
And I was curious about singing as well, whether you sing and if you like to, and how that is for you.
Cannot carry a tune at all. Nope. I wish I could, but that's the running joke in my family. I cannot sing if my life depended on it. I like to sing, but only to myself.
Yeah.
And I will sing to my son the lullabies, but he probably has a terrible base level of what singing is. My sister is actually a very good singer, so I'm glad she has a musical talent in the family. Any other questions so far, or reactions to this demo or the history?
How would you describe your language and your hearing language skills before the implant at 18?
Yeah.
What was the new language you had to learn when you got this?
Okay, so I actually had pretty high language skills growing up because, again, I had those first 3 to 4 years of language as an infant. And so I had a pretty good vocabulary, and I was already being raised with an oral education. That said, I did have to undergo a significant amount of speech therapy, and then that dropped off. And so when I got the cochlear implant, I actually picked that up again. And I said, you know what, I think it's time for a refresh. I think I need to go to speech therapy again because A, I don't really like the way I sound, and maybe I don't sound as good as I thought I did with hearing aids. So I did that for a year or two, and then when I got to college, I got really busy, and then, as we all know, and then that sort of dropped off. But it's been an ongoing process of learning to hear and learning to listen. And that changes with each device that I get. So I have been upgraded the external device about, is there a problem or anything?
No, I
Okay, all right. I've been upgraded, I would say by my count, 6 or 7 devices for my first year. So with each device, that's a new set of auditory parameters, and it takes me a little bit of time to adjust, anywhere from 1 week to a month, if not longer. So it's always a learning process for me.
And are there kinds of physical settings like auditoriums, live theater, whatever, that are more difficult than regular?
Yeah, so, and I think this is true for all of us, but in noisy restaurant settings or bars, those are very difficult. So I tend to rely more on lip reading in those settings, which actually can be kind of an advantage because I'm not doing the shouting in your ear kind of thing. But classroom settings, were initially challenging, but now that I'm on the other end of things as a teacher, I can actually control the questions and the classroom discussion a lot better, rather than as a student trying to track where the discussion was. But when I was an undergraduate, I did use a real-time captioning technology, which is essentially what you see for television programmers. So I had someone capture the conversation in real time for my English discussions. So that's another kind of assistive device, and that was really helpful. But when I got the second implant, I actually finally felt like I was able to follow along with the discussion section, and having the computer actually, because it had a time lag as a point of reference, I decided to take the leap and say, I think I'm going to do this on my own.
And so now, do you like to go to movie theaters, live theaters?
I've always enjoyed that. I tend to gravitate towards action films in the movie theater because they're a little bit more visual, and I often, to my husband's frustration, will rewatch movies. You know, I'll buy them, like, even though we've seen them in the movie theaters, because I want to watch them with captions. But there are technologies available for captioning at the movie theater. I just have never really, yeah, so I've never really, I just prefer to have the immersive experience.
I was wondering if you're worried that your child would try to imitate your voice.
I have been thinking a lot about this because he's just coming into his own with his language. He's about 2.5 years old. And he's already aware that I have cochlear implants and that I can't hear him in the morning. And so he'll hand me my implants in the morning. And sometimes he'll try to put them on himself. I'm like, no, don't do that. So that's like astonishing to me. But I'm not so much worried about that because he's actually in preschool now. So he's surrounded by people talking to him. And my husband has hearing and does not have an accent. So, but initially my worry was, can I understand him? And that actually was not a concern because when you become a parent, which some of you may, you still have some time from that point, but there's a sort of an unspoken connection, and because you're listening to your child articulate their words for the first time, you just kind of get it, and you figure it out, and honestly, it's a guessing game anyway. What the heck was he trying to say there? I don't know. I mean, and so in a way, I'm already sort of primed or tuned to put those pieces together and figure out what someone is saying when I don't have all the pieces. And so I have to do that with my son. So in a way, it makes me an even better listener than I think most parents, because I can be like, oh, here's the context. This is what she's referring to. Okay, this is the word that she's trying to articulate to me.
And are you aware of regional American accents when they happen by?
Yes. Yeah, accents can really stump me. I studied abroad in Australia for 6 months, and wow, that was hard. The Australian accents are very strong, but I may do. And so, yes, accents jump out at me really quickly. I'm pretty good at placing accents, but there are some times where I can't figure out where they're from. My husband's from the South, and so I've become very familiar with Southern accents. Yeah.
About your experience with students that may suffer from things like techniques. I'm not sure if I'm saying that word correctly, but you can hear certain frequencies even though it's not coming from it's just in your brain. If these type of devices cover that up or are able to minimize that feeling or sound in your head.
Okay. So to be sure, I missed the first part. So to be sure I understood you, you're asking if certain frequencies are difficult for me to discern.
I've read, I don't suffer from hearing loss.
Yeah. Okay.
But I've read that some people that do suffer from it still hear certain frequencies in their head, even though it's not coming from the outside.
Oh, okay. So phantom sounds.
Cover up that noise, or does it change the brain into listening to different, I don't know how
Okay.
it works.
So it's a question about phantom sound.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. So yes, that I don't particularly have that issue with phantom sound, but when I did first get the implant, when my implants were off, I would get that phantom ringing because that was my nerves starting to fire up again in new ways, especially with my new ear because it had been dormant for so long. So it was pretty jarring, but that actually went away over time once the nerve pathways became more accustomed. So I can't speak to that. Are you talking about tinnitus?
Maybe, I don't know if that covers
Yeah.
our range of hands on.
Maybe. I personally can't speak to that, but that would be really interesting to think about. Yeah. Can you speak up a little bit? Sorry.
I think you maybe were already going to talk about this.
Okay.
Well, I'm sorry. Could you talk a little bit about how cochlear implants have been received by the deaf community?
Yes. Yes. So I'm actually headed in that direction. So thank you for allowing me to segue there because we're kind of running out of time. Ooh, let's see. Okay. So, well, you can come back to that. So there are several different communities that have approached the cochlear implant, and one community that has been really antagonistic, well, at least initially, is the deaf community. And so just to be clear, there's the deaf with a capital D community, which is its own linguistic community. They communicate through sign language, American Sign Language, and then there are different dialects and sign language across different countries is also different. So Chinese Sign Language is different from American Sign Language, for example. And then they have their own set of cultural practices. So the deaf culture was actually, they had their sign for a cochlear implant was this, or this. So this means vampire. So they saw the cochlear implant as sort of this like soul-sucking technology initially. And they worried that, the language here is really strong. There was something called deficide or language death of American Sign Language. They worried that the cochlear implant, because it emphasized sound and because it emphasized spoken language, would essentially wipe out the deaf culture or the deaf community. That hasn't happened, and now I would say there's more of sort of a tentative embrace where it's not so much war against the cochlear implant, but there's like a tepid acceptance of it within the deaf community because they realize it is practical in some scenarios, but it doesn't have to take away American Sign Language. And there was actually this wonderful documentary called The Sound and the Fury, which I was going to show you a trailer, but I don't think we have time for it, but I would highly recommend that you all take a look at this if you are interested in studying this further. It essentially follows a deaf family who has a young daughter who wants to get cochlear implants, and they're struggling with that decision. They say, well, she's expressed interest, but we're against this, so what do we do? And so, long story short, she ended up getting the cochlear implant, but it was a journey and a process for them. And this video is really well known, and I think won some awards for this. So it's a great documentary. And one thing that I will say, and we didn't really get a chance to talk much about this, but there is this tension between thinking about assistive technology as normalization. So let's use assistive technology to bring someone back to the norm. Right? But the disability community sometimes has some tension with that. I would say quite frequently, actually. Why do we need to normalize our bodies to meet some cultural standard? That can be a problem. And so the deaf community represents and articulates that perspective. It treats deafness as a disability rather than a vibrant cultural identity, right? And then it also undercuts the centrality and value of silence and nonverbal communication in deaf culture, okay? And then I'm going to skip ahead to show sort of the other side of this, which is the deaf futurists, okay? So these are people that I would say I probably align with this group a little bit more. Deafened individuals who are hard of hearing and who rely on oral language to communicate, who believe in harnessing technology to solve communication problems at large. So in a way, many people have sort of gravitated towards cochlear implants because they think that it's the first step towards brain-computer implants. In other words, brain-computer implants that can actually like log on to the internet and create new mind-to-mind communication. That might be pretty scary to some, but the author that I had all of you read today actually has his whole second book about this. It's called Worldwide Mind. And he essentially says that we are all going to walk away one day with implantable devices that will allow us to communicate wirelessly with everyone. In a way, one could say it's already happening because I can stream music directly into my head. Wow, okay. So it's not so far-fetched as it might seem. Are we just about out of time? Or, so yeah, I think we'll stop there, and I'm happy to answer any other questions.
So I think what we'll do is, for people that have to leave, we'll have a break for that. But if you're willing to stay, Lindsay can continue with her slides and answer questions. So those who have to leave, this would be a good time. Otherwise, you can stick around. Thank you.
Thanks. The questions are always like more generative, which is great. That's really what I wanted it to do, to be able to. Yeah. Yeah, this is really like a 2-hour presentation, but